I basically want to tell you guys a story, or a couple of stories, well, a few stories. So a close friend of mine was talking to me the other day, and I was really on fire about something. I really felt called by God to do something. I don't remember what it was now, but I was like really excited. I was really excited about it, and so I was sharing this with my friend, and then my friend asked me, so what is it like to be called? How does that feel? Like, how does it feel to be called by God? And I stopped for a minute, and I realized that I didn't really have a good answer. I was like, I don't know. I can't tell you what it's like. I can tell you what it's like for me, but God calls us each uniquely. He knows us so well. He knows us more than we know ourselves, and that's really comforting, because if He called us each the same way, most of us wouldn't understand, right? So God is so merciful. He'll call us each uniquely and each in the best way to where we'll understand. So again, I can't tell you guys how you're called by God, but I can tell you a little bit about how I have been called and what it's felt like for me in my life. So here's a couple of instances that I want to share with you guys. So the first instance was at my very first retreat. So this retreat was in the fall, and it was really beautiful, and it actually didn't go how it was supposed to. The team that was supposed to lead it was not able to show up because one of them got COVID. And yes, this was fall retreat of last year. And I think it was a blessing in disguise, though, even though those wonderful people were not able to show up. I got things out of that retreat that I probably would not have otherwise. And so, for instance, one thing that I really got out of that retreat was the adoration. I had always heard stories, and you guys probably always heard stories about how beautiful the adoration was, and how moving it was, and how everybody was sobbing, right? And that was the only time I've ever cried in adoration. And if you know me, I'm not really a crier. I don't really cry over movies. I don't cry over books, not usually. I don't like crying in front of other people. It's embarrassing. But that day, I was sobbing. And it was surreal, it was unusual, and it made me feel really vulnerable. But God was making me vulnerable for Him. He was opening me up to Him to receive His graces. And so after adoration, we had Mass. And if you guys remember, those of you who were there was a women's group, a women's retreat going on at the same place at the same time. And they came and they had Mass with us. And so after Mass, I was standing with a couple other people from our group, and these two women walked up. And the first lady was just saying what a great group we were, and how reverent we were, and how we need to just keep doing what we're doing, and just, a pat on the back for us, right? And then there was another lady who came up, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and she looked me in the eye, and she said, I don't know why, but I'm supposed to tell you that you are God's beloved daughter. And she gave me a hug, and I think she said God bless or something, and she walked away. So I started crying again, and I started laughing, and it was so surreal. I was like, why me? Why was I supposed to hear that? So at the time, I didn't know why that was supposed to happen, but it was just, amazing, like this stranger telling me this direct message from God. And actually later, I kept that close to my heart, and later it helped me realize who I am. Even like writing this presentation helped me realize that I am God's beloved daughter. I'm His little girl, and that is who I'm called to be. And I realized that day that being vulnerable really isn't such a bad thing. So the second instance seems like really different. Like it's a really different scenario, but it also has to do with being vulnerable. So in order to go into this, I have to tell you a little bit about myself. So if you know me, I'm not a very quiet person. I laugh really loudly. I'm a little bit outspoken. I'm not as loud as the Ortizes. But, your family, we're not quiet people, right? That's really different when I go to school. I go to Greenville Tech. I dual enroll, and I am really afraid of being wrong, and I'm very non-confrontational. So I'm kind of that student that sits in the back of the room, knows all the answers, says nothing, gets good grades, and leaves. So I'm kind of cold and kind of quiet, and I don't really want to talk to anybody. So keep that in mind as I tell you a little bit more. So one day in class, my teacher, she said that she grew up Catholic, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. Then she proceeded to say something that the Catholic Church taught that it simply did not. So it's just a flat out heresy, and I was like, oof. maybe because, me being my timid, back of the classroom kind of person. And so I, went home, went about my business, complained to a classmate of mine about it. And then that Sunday at youth group, and you guys will probably remember, we watched this video on this priest, and he was on fire about his faith. He was super emotional. It was a homily actually, but it was just amazing to see how passionate he was about his faith, about the pro-life movement. And he told a story about getting off the bus, or in other words, standing up for what you believe. And I was like, the instance with my teacher immediately came to mind. I was like, okay, fine. All right, I see what you're saying. So I was, terrified, but I went home that night. I had class the next day, and I talked to my parents, and I studied up on what the Catholic Church teaches in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And after class the next day, I shuffled up to my teacher and was like, hey, can we talk about this? So the result was not what I was expecting. We had like a 30-minute conversation, which I hardly even called a conversation because she kind of talked at me for like 30 minutes. It wasn't like she was mad at me or anything. She talked to me about things that weren't even related to my original topic, like what I wanted to talk to her about. But it was really interesting. I learned a lot about her. But I was like, why was I supposed to do that? I handed her the few printouts that I had, but I didn't know the purpose because the result wasn't what I expected. But I just knew I was supposed to. And when I was researching for this talk, I came across the saint of today, which is Saint Stanislaus, and he was the Bishop of Krakow, Poland in 1072. That's when he became the bishop. And he was executed for standing up against the king for his faith. And I was like, whoa, look, I'm doing like what Saint Stanislaus and like the other saints that had to stand up for their faith in a very little way. But I was still risking something, right? Because this was my teacher. She was an authority over me, and she could have taken my correction and she could have biased that against my grade, which she did not, thank goodness. She took it really well. But it was really cool to realize how, as a Catholic, I'm called to, my mission is the same with the saints, the big saints who risk their lives for their faith, but I was also risking something and standing up for what I believe, and being vulnerable, opening myself up to others in order to open some doors that Christ can go through. So the last scenario that I'd like to share with you actually scared me the most. Scared is a really strong word, but it's the best word I could come up with. And it was, again, I have to go back into a little bit about myself in order to explain this better. For as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a wife and mother. Like, I want a husband, I want to be a stay-at-home mom, have all these kids, be that powerful homeschool Catholic mom. And so that's what I've wanted to do. So when I've prayed about my vocation and been discerning about my vocation, I have tried as hard as you possibly can to not be called to the religious life. So that's not really fair. I was just being like, God, please don't let that happen. So actually another youth group instance, we had the day of reflection, which was really beautiful, and we should have more of those, especially before I leave. And throughout the day, we would read scripture, and then we would journal, like by ourselves, about something that jumped out or whatever it is that we felt called to write about. And it was prayer. And the same theme kept hitting me every time, and it was to be little. And it was like Saint Teresa of Lisieux, she talks about the little way, and I had learned a lot about her when reading 33 Days to Merciful Love, which April recommended, and I recommend to all of you. It's by Father Gately. It's a really great book, so just throwing that out there. And she talks about how she felt called to be a little soul, and she wasn't called to be a big saint, do great things, do big things, be an example to others. She was called to be little, and to be so little that God would have pity on her and carry her to heaven. And I was like, whoa, that's what I want to do. So that day of reflection, that same theme kept coming up, being little, being little, being little. And then we read the story of the rich man. And we were told to read the story like as being one of the characters. And so the character that I chose was the rich man. And while reading through this, an idea hit me like a wall. And I realized when the rich man is saying, hey, I'm a good person, what else am I supposed to do to get to heaven? And Jesus tells him, basically, you need to give me everything. You need to be willing to give me everything in order to get to heaven. And I was like, whoa. Because I realized that my vocation, I had been holding back that desire. I was not giving that desire to be a wife and mother to God in order to properly open myself up to be called to whichever my vocation is. And I still don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I feel a lot freer, and I am free to discern which direction I'm supposed to go. And I was saying that I have to be little enough for God to carry me, and it makes it sound like he's not strong enough, and that's not exactly what I mean. And the fact is, I have free will, so I have to choose to be little enough. I have to choose to give him everything for him to carry me to heaven. So at the stage of life that I am right now, as a 17-year-old, faith weaver, going to school, going to church, going to youth group, having friends, dating, all that, I am supposed to be little. I am supposed to listen to others, not be that light shining to other people. I'm supposed to listen to those who know more than I do and just live in that humility. And I am supposed to be vulnerable. I'm supposed to open myself up to the Lord so that he can pour his graces into me. And I'm supposed to be vulnerable towards other people as well so that I can share my faith, put myself out there, and be that witness. And I'm supposed to give him everything, and be little so he can carry me to heaven. And I am weak, I am vulnerable, I am human. I am God's little girl, and I'm not perfect. But that's where God's mercy comes in. I think it's very appropriate that I'm talking about calling on Divine Mercy Sunday, because God's mercy is so great. We have a whole day to celebrate it. And when we are called, we don't always listen. There are so many times that I can think of in my life where I have not listened to God's call, but God's grace is so infinite. Our beautiful Jesus will let us start over and brush ourselves off and just give us a second chance. So I have honestly no idea why I was supposed to speak to you about this today, but I know that God will make the most of it, and it's okay if I don't know, because he's got it, right? It's in his hands. And so I want to ask you guys to please pray for me in my journey to heaven as I'm praying for all of you, and I thank you for listening to my story.